Good morning. Welcome to River Community Church. My name is Sam. I'm one of the pastors here. Thrilled to have all of you here with us this morning. I don't know about you, but that last song has hit me all morning long. It's just fantastic. Not just because they did an amazing job with it, because they did, but also because it is the literal most fitting song for this message this morning that they could have possibly had. It is the entire message built into a song. So I just asked them. We're going to sing it again at the end, so that'll be cool. So maybe you really like that. That'll be fun for you. If you don't, you can leave. That's fine. We don't want you here anyways. Just kidding. No, but it'll be fun. I'm so excited. So as you listen to that song, I think you're going to love it because I think it'll have even more meaning for you at the end of this message than it did at the beginning. With that, if you're new here, if you haven't been here for a while, you need to know that we are in this series called Life Hacks. We're basically looking at the hacks on life, the way to live life in a better way that God gives us in the book of Proverbs. I think it's been awesome so far. We're in the book chapters 7 through 9 this morning. And there's just this crazy breadth of things that are in those chapters, so we can't focus on it all. Instead, we're going to focus in on one key verse and a couple of others that really, I think, shows something about what we see in the Bible all over, especially in the Old Testament, and I think will help us maybe understand it better and will also have an impact on our lives. And like I said, we see it all over the Bible. For example, Moses. There's this time that he's with the Israelites, and he is walking down the mountain. He had just spent a number of days up on the mountain talking with God, kind of getting the plan ready for what they're going to do next. And he's up there on the mountain and just having this experience where he's finding out what to do next, and he doesn't realize what's happening. But because he's been there for a number of days, and he's just in the presence of God for a number of days, his face has literally changed. So he comes walking down the mountain, and people see him, and they're afraid. They're scared of what they see. They see Moses, and literally what has happened is Moses' face, because he's in the presence of God, has begun to glow, to be radiant, to radiate light. Moses' face is glowing, and it says this: "So when Aaron and the people of Israel saw the radiance of Moses' face, they were afraid to come near him." I imagine that scene. Moses is coming down the mountain, they see his face, and it's like people scatter. Like there's this imaginary bubble around him where people see that and they're too afraid to come a certain distance to him. They're scared by it. They see this thing and fear keeps them back. In another story, a little while later, years later, there's a nobody from a nobody tribe of Israel, and he finds himself face to face with his angel. He doesn't quite know if it's an angel yet or not, but it's this mesmerizing experience. Israel had just been handed over to the Midianites. The Midianites had conquered them, and they were cruel people. So they were treating the Israelites very poorly, and the Israelites were calling out on God to save them, to rescue from them. And so God sends an angel to a man named Gideon. And the angel says to Gideon, this nobody from a nobody tribe, he says, "Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you." Angel tells Gideon how he will be used by God to save his people, to have this conversation. But Gideon still at this point isn't quite sure who this person is, doesn't realize that it's an angel. And he goes and like you would do with anybody who you're kind of hosting, you would go and get him some dinner. Some food. He brings this food to him, and he brings this food as a sacrifice. And so the angel tells him to put the food over in this particular place, and then he takes his staff, this wooden staff that he has, and he touches the food. And in that moment, the food sets ablaze on fire, and the angel disappears. Obviously, something is really serious here for Gideon. Something has happened. This moment, Gideon realized who this person had been. And so, this is what it says. It says, when Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he cried out, "Oh, sovereign Lord, I'm doomed. I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face." In his mind, to have that kind of experience was the end of him. He was not worthy to be in that angel's presence, much less God's. And so this fear takes hold of him. Now, obviously, his life is long and there's good things that he does and God works through him, but there's this fear there. There's terror. There's this gut-sinking acidic tasting, heart racing feeling. I think it's a feeling so many of us know. We know it. Some of us know it too well. It grips so tightly sometimes you can hardly breathe. This word, fear. It's used to describe the way people react to experiencing God all throughout the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, but literally all throughout the Bible, this fear is present when people experience God or God's messengers. Maybe for you this morning, you grew up in a tradition that would emphasize fearing God, and so here this morning, like, yeah, I'm afraid of God. Like, it's why I basically never go to church, because it's scary. I'm afraid of God. Maybe that's you this morning. Maybe you're here this morning and you think, fear God? What's that all about? God's loving. I don't want to fear God. He's a loving God. I don't need to worry about that fear part. Kind of both ends of the spectrum, don't we? So what is this fear thing all about? A couple years back, my wife Meg and the boys and I were in the car, and we were driving from Sheboygan. We had spent the day on the beach there in Sheboygan, and we were driving back. It had been a great day, but there had been some spotty showers, and we knew that there was a possibility of some thunderstorms. And so we're driving back, and we're basically about to Fond du Lac. And you know how on the east side of Fond du Lac there's this huge hill, and it kind of overlooks the whole city of Fond du Lac? Well, as we're driving up to that hill, we see this storm on the horizon. And it's not just your normal thunderstorm. Like, the whole horizon is dark as night, black, and only lit up once in a while by the lightning, and then you'd hear the crack of the thunder, and it would vibrate as you're going into it. And that's all fine and normal. Like, that would be like a normal thunderstorm, but while we were going down that hill into Fond du Lac, there was this other part of the storm that made it a bit more frightening. It was the calm. It was the quiet. Off in the distance, you could see the trees moving. But where we were, it was calm before the storm. That saying has some pretty deep meaning when you've experienced that moment. So the storm hits as soon as we roll into Fond du Lac. Sorry. And so we roll into Fond du Lac, and the storm is coming, and so we go over and we park in the festival foods parking lot that's over there, along with a bunch of other cars, and so there we sit beside it, and we're just watching the storm go over us, and there's cars next to you, the wind's just rushing past you, the thunder would crack, and you could feel it in your chest and your bones. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying, and it was powerful, and it was awesome. It's got this feeling to it. It's some meshing together of fear and awe and wonder and terror and astonishment. All of these things wrapped up together into this emotion you can feel in your stomach and taste on your lips. And that feeling, that emotion, I think that begins to help us understand what Gideon must have felt, what the Israelites must have experienced. And finally, for us, it begins to help us understand and make sense of these words in Proverbs 9:10. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One results in good judgment. Fear of the Lord. Now, like we said earlier, maybe that strikes you as an odd concept. Why should I be afraid? Why on earth would fear of God be the beginning and foundation of wisdom? Are we really supposed to fear God? How can fear be the beginning of wisdom? We're taught all the time that you shouldn't learn out of fear. Fear seems a little silly. And I think we've maybe overthrown that idea a little too much. Fear, it can be a really wonderful thing. Say you go out and you enter the Grand Canyon, right? You find yourself in this very high place. Fear is that thing that makes 99% of us not go near as far out as that guy. It's the thing that makes us like creep slowly, like, okay, that's far enough. Without fear, we'd be running and doing, no, just kidding. You thought I was going to jump, didn't you? Without fear, though, we have that thing where we might just not actually think about what it is we're doing. Fear is a fantastic teacher. It helps us be wise in certain circumstances. But the verse doesn't just say fear is the beginning of wisdom or the foundation of wisdom. That's not it. It says fear of the Lord is. Why does fear of the Lord matter? It's because our fear should be proportional. Proportional. Say you go down a hike, and you're hiking along, and all of a sudden you hear something rustling in the woods, and you see this kind of strolling out. It's like, oh, that's awesome. It's a nice deer. I'm going to see how close I can get to it without it kind of jumping away. I'm going to take a picture of it. It's really neat. Cool. Awesome. Well, then you continue on your hike, and you go a little further, and then all of a sudden you hear another rustling in the woods, and then you see this thing. Terror. Sheer terror. Because proportionally, those things are very, very different. Deer, that's not so bad. Maybe a little bit nervous, whatever. What's it going to do? Bear, actually don't run, but the instinct is to run. Apparently, you're supposed to do this. Anybody know that? Like you're supposed to make yourself big? I don't know if I could do that. I don't know. I think I just run. But it's proportional, right? It's proportional. Our fear should be proportional, especially when we're talking about God. There's this time that the disciples, they're actually the apostles, because Jesus had already died and then rose from the dead. He's resurrected. And so they're out teaching about this. They're out telling people, hey, Jesus, listen to what happened to Jesus. Jesus is the Messiah. If you believe in him, your life changes. Things are different now. Look at what's been accomplished by Jesus. And so they're teaching this, but the religious leaders of the time are weary of what they're saying. They don't like it because not only are they unsure what they're saying, but they're also unsure if they like the idea of people following these other apostles. It's shifting the power thing, so they're not happy with it. So they take these apostles, and some people kind of tell some false stories about them that gets them in trouble. And so they end up in this synagogue, like equivalent of our church, and they're there with these religious authorities, and they're basically being scolded for what they're doing. And almost to the point where these religious leaders are about to kill them. Like they have that authority to do that sort of a thing. But they're stopped slightly short of that. And as they do it, they keep on having these conversations. They actually say this to the apostles. They say, we gave you strict orders. Never again to teach in this man's name, he said. Instead, you have filled all Jerusalem with your teaching about him, and you want to make us responsible for his death. That's what they're saying. These are the authorities. Imagine that. They're the religious authorities in the day. They had a lot of power. And so they hear that. And you know what the response is? It's this. But Peter and the apostles replied, we must obey God rather than any human authority. Imagine that for a second. Standing in front of these religious leaders who could have you killed, and saying, we can't obey you. We've got to obey God. We can't obey you. We must obey God instead. Talk about having some guts. But these apostles, they had something right. They had something right. Their fear, their understanding of who's in charge, it was proportional in the best way. It is difficult to be afraid of people when you've experienced the awesome power of God. I'll say that one more time. It is difficult to be afraid of people when you've experienced the awesome power of God. And when I say awesome, I'm not saying awesome like, hey, that's cool, dude. That's really great. Cool. No, I mean awesome like thunderstorm awesome, all-consuming power and glory awesome. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom because it is the most fundamental thing. We go outside later today and we look at the creation around us. We see mountains and oceans. We see these amazing trees and forests. and valleys and rivers, and we see a flower and inspect the intricacies of it. We see a bumblebee fly on top of it and see the amazingness of its own little tiny wing. We're amazed by this. When we do this, we're stunned into this deep humility that there must be a creator. There must be a creator. And who are we when compared with that creator? Who are we compared to God? Thinking about that, it naturally leads us to something. This act. Something that we were made to do, something that we just have deep in our bones and our guts. It just comes out of us. Something that just comes out of us, something called worship. Worship. Honor, reverence, devotion, any kind of expression of these towards something. We can worship all kinds of stuff, but when we're healthiest and most right, it's when we worship God. And we do this by singing like we just did. We just sang some songs to God, and that's an act of worship. We do it also, though, by living differently in light of who we know God to be. We worship with the way we get together on a Sunday morning. I mean, there's a million other things we could be doing, but when we come here on a Sunday morning, we're saying, God, you are God, I am not. I want to show you respect and honor and devotion. I'm showing up to show you that this morning. So kudos to you for being here and doing that today. And this worship, it leads us to a deeper understanding of God, who he is, what God is like, what his character is like, and that understanding God in this way, it makes us wise. It leads us to wisdom. And that wisdom, as it says in Proverbs, produces these things in our lives. It says this in Proverbs 8:32-35, and so, my children, listen to me. For all who follow my ways are joyful. Listen to my instructions and be wise. Don't ignore it. Joyful are those who listen to me, watching for me daily at my gates, waiting for me outside my home. For whoever finds me finds life and receives favor from the Lord. When we search for God's wisdom, and I think that's the thunder, guys. When we search for God's wisdom, it produces joy and life and God's favor. What's amazing about this is that it produces these things in our lives no matter the circumstances, no matter what's stacked against us. You guys remember those disciples who had just walked out of being scolded and whipped and warned that they could die from this stuff? Do you know what they did after they left? They're just warned not to teach about Jesus by people who could have them killed, and it says this. It says this in Acts 5:41. The apostles left the high council, rejoicing that God had counted them worthy to suffer disgrace for the name of Jesus. And every day in the temple and from house to house, they continued to teach and preach this message: Jesus is the Messiah. Fear of the Lord. And the wisdom that comes from it. It produced in these followers of Jesus joy and life and God's favor, even as they were facing these impossible circumstances, these scary circumstances. And I would argue, in addition to those few things, it produces one more very, very important thing. When you worship and experience and learn about God and all of his glory, I believe something changes in us. What changes is this: we become bold and confident. We begin to possess this boldness and confidence. Wouldn't you love to be more bold and confident about the things that matter most in your life? Wouldn't that be fantastic? Wouldn't you love to have that in your life? When we're faced with a tough decision at work, we have to make a decision and it's difficult. Wouldn't it be nice to just know? To make a decision with confidence because you know the right answer? When we're caring for our spouse and leading our kids, wouldn't it be amazing to be bold about what matters most in our homes? When we talk with someone who hasn't experienced the kind of faith that we have yet, wouldn't it be amazing to have boldness and confidence about why this faith we have has changed us and shaped us, and we could share that without worrying about the consequences? Fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One results in good judgment. The right kind of fear of God can be a game changer in our lives. It can absolutely shift our lives. Instead of fearing what people might think, instead of fearing the outcome of what you know to be the right decision, you're just scared to make it. Instead of that fear, having a healthy fear of God puts the other fears in our lives in their place. They just don't matter when compared with God. They just are way second place, which allows us then to be confident and bold. And don't you want that? How you view God changes everything. Now, we've said fear God, but fear does not mean fright. Don't mistake the kind of fear we're talking about with the fright that would cause you to keep your distance, like the people did with Moses. You're not like all of a sudden stunned and having to scatter or run away. Don't mistake the kind of fear that we're talking about with fright, because you do not need to keep your distance from God. In fact, the opposite is the case. When Proverbs was written, it was still hundreds of years before Jesus walked the earth. When Jesus came, he shifted this fear in the most powerful way possible. Through Jesus, God became knowable, human form. We know God through Jesus. Through Jesus, God became approachable because he washes us clean. He makes us right with God. We don't have anything to fear. His grace covers us and makes us so that we can know God and approach God. Jesus, through his death and resurrection, made us worthy of this incredible thing that Paul talks about. He says it in Ephesians 3. He says, because of Christ and our faith in him, we can now come boldly and confidently into God's presence. We can go boldly into God's presence. You know, there are people that chase storms. Has anybody experienced that or heard that, watched that, Storm Chasers or whatever? Raise your hand. Like a few of you. Okay, you know what I'm talking about? Good. All right. I think that's crazy. I think that's nuts. I don't know how they do it, but for some reason they absolutely adore the idea of finding storms and racing into the middle of them. It's nuts. It's crazy, but for some reason they just love the rush of the power of those storms. For me, the only way that I would willingly want to do that is if I had some kind of guarantee from God saying, hey, you're going to be fine. Like, it's going to be all right. If I had that guarantee from God, I think I would do it. Because wouldn't it be amazing? Like, when you know you're going to be safe, you don't have to worry about that part of it. Witnessing the rush of a thunderstorm rolling in over the top of you is this incredible experience. The thunder, it beats in your chest. The wind whistles past your ears. We can experience something like that when we follow Jesus. That kind of experience is possible because of Jesus. We feel that in a storm. But in life, Jesus makes it something that can be a part of everyday life. The kind of experience is possible because of him. When we follow Jesus, because he makes us right with God through his death and resurrection, when we follow him, we get to feel that kind of power. And that kind of power is on our side. Is on our side. You can experience that. But how? How? When Paul says we can go boldly and confidently into God's presence, he doesn't just mean when we sing or worship or pray. And that's possible. Like maybe when we were singing just a minute or two ago, you felt that and you experienced that. You could feel God's presence and it was amazing. I did. It was great. But it's not just then. You can do that in everyday steps in life, everyday ways of taking steps and growing your relationship with God. For example, this summer we're doing baptism, and I cannot think of a better example of this. What happens with baptism is quite literally, I don't know about you, but some of you might think it's a little bit frightening. I mean, the idea of going out into the water, it's kind of scary, right? Maybe you don't even like going in the water, and going under the water is terrifying, so that's kind of a scary thing. Or maybe you're just worried, like, what are people going to say? Like, what are they going to think? Oh, he's Christian? What? Is that weird? You're afraid that they'll think differently of you? I get that. That's a real thing. It's possible, and it's a little bit scary maybe. But here's the thing. Baptism is this perfect example of how we can take a look at God. See that God says, hey, if you believe, then you should be baptized. This is this way of demonstrating this change that's happened in you. You should go and do that. And to have a healthy fear of God is to say, you're right, God, I'm going to do what you say I should do, and I'm not going to worry about those other fears. That fear of you is way higher than other things, and it's an appropriate fear. I know you're not going to smite me or something if I don't. That's not what we're talking about. But you do tell me I should do this, and if you do, I know it's good for me. And if you say it, I'm not going to be afraid of what other things I might need to be afraid of. I don't need to, because you say I should do it. And that's baptism. If you're interested in that, there'll be somebody by the baptism sign out there in the comments afterwards, and you can find out more about it. I think it's an amazing experience to show God your respect and honor for him, especially to Jesus. But it doesn't have to be with baptism. It can be with so many other things. You may be afraid of standing up to someone because of what other people might say or think. Maybe there's somebody that's getting made fun of at work or at school, some kid's getting bullied, and you want to say something, but you're a little nervous. Or maybe you're afraid of being honest about your faith because you're worried that people will judge you for it. And you don't want to have that happen, so you're a little afraid of saying something. You may be afraid of what will happen if you choose integrity and honesty and kindness. What will be the consequence if I choose to be honest in this situation? Because I'm a little afraid of what's going to happen if I don't. In all of these circumstances, we have these fears, but they shouldn't be in any way close to the fear we have of who God is. And the knowledge of as we follow God, he's righteous, he's right, and as we're with him, he's with us. Imagine if our fear of God outweighed the fear of those things. Imagine if you chose to live confidently in the presence of God because of your faith in Jesus. Can you imagine the thunder in your chest as you feel God working through you? Can you imagine the wind rushing around you as you know you're doing what God would have you do? Can you imagine the spectacular lightning lighting up the lives of the people in your life as you actually are willing to engage them with this faith of yours? Can you imagine God working through you like that and having a front row seat to those things happening in your life? You can have that. So this week, I challenge us, all of us, may we fear God with holy reverence. May we grow in his knowledge and his wisdom. May we claim the confidence and the boldness that he can give us in our lives to make decisions and believe strongly in what he tells us to believe. May it cause us to live differently. And may we know Jesus and his power and live boldly in his presence. If you want that for yourself, that's how I'm going to close. I'm going to ask God that we could live these bold lives, these confident lives of following him with this right fear, this awe of who he is that is way far and above any worries we have of anything else in our life. If you want that for yourself and to live so boldly, would you pray with me? Dear God, we are incredibly grateful for who you are. As we listen to the thunder kind of rolling over us here, we are in awe of your wonder, of how big and amazing you are. And we know you we should fear you in this way. And fear is really the only word that quite grasps it. We know we don't need to be afraid now because we have Jesus and he makes us right with you. However, you are so big and awesome that the only word that even comes close is fear. So we love you, God, and we treat you with the respect that you deserve. May it be the thing that causes us to live differently, to live boldly and confidently for you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hey everybody, it's Natasha. I hope you're enjoying the service today. In a moment, we're going to continue to worship together. We're going to do this by singing and by giving. Anytime you give, it is an act of worship to God. It is pleasing and honoring to Him. If you came prepared to give today, the hosts are going to come down in a moment. You can give your gift in the offering basket as it comes along at the end of the service, or you can check out our website, rccsunday.com, click on the icon, and follow the steps. But don't forget to connect to the school Wi-Fi. Enjoy the service.